Hello, my name is Max Elliott, and this is an introduction to stucco. So stucco, also simply a form of plaster. A lot of you may have heard it as exterior plaster or Portland cement-based plaster, and the photo on the left is an example of plaster being used for obviously architecture and the decorative aspects that uh, you know artists have used plaster for centuries. And it's just another example of the versatility of these building materials. And as we'll see here in a few slides, it really wasn't until the late 19th century where Portland cement-based plaster really became the forefront of uh, what we would consider stucco. So we'll walk through stucco on a high level and then kind of dive into a little bit of the industry standards and building codes, graze the surface of that, show you some installation pictures as well as accessories that go along with the stucco installation itself. And then we'll touch on the surface of some typical problems that you might see with stucco or behind it. One thing that hit me as I was putting together this presentation is, I found online somewhere that said that the stucco, plaster, and mortar, the difference in that nomenclature is essentially minimal, and it's primarily based on its use in building elements rather than its actual physical composition, as the ingredients, if you will, to make those different products, as you'd see as stucco, plaster, and mortar, are very similar, and a lot of it has to do with just the ratio of Portland cement, which is much in what we would consider true exterior stucco that you see in the background of the picture here. And although we could probably spend an entire semester diving into cement-based products for construction systems, uh, we'll dive into what stucco is used for and how it's used. So, as it says, traditionally stucco is used as an exterior facade now, and that's the context that we're referring to, not necessarily some of the other interior plaster installations that you might see that are very similar to this typical exterior grade stucco. And so nowadays you would most commonly see this on single family homes or townhomes and or lower mid-rise construction, multifamily properties, things of that nature. And certainly in drier climates, you typically would see the stucco installation, but there's some other provisions that you need to include if you are going to install stucco in a wetter climate, which we'll see here in just a few minutes. So traditionally, stucco installation and exterior facades is most commonly done in a three-coat system where you have a scratch coat, a brown coat, and a finish coat. And there are other proprietary systems that are available. I personally don't have any experience with them, but understand there are 1- and 2-coat stucco systems. But again, as it indicates, they must be tested and approved to meet certain codes for that jurisdiction. So here on the slide, you'll see a typical 3-coat system. So you have your exterior sheathing, which can be plywood, OSB, or some other exterior grade gypsum sheathing product. And then most commonly, you've got 2 layers of this is a water-resistant barrier, but commonly your weather-resistant barrier. And then you've got your lath on top, which I'll show you pictures of, and then you've got your 3 layers of stucco. And similar on this slide, just showing you a different perspective at the foundation, where you've got your building paper, which could consist of a Tyvek type barrier product. Combine that with 1 or 2 layers of grade D felt paper, and then you've got your your lath and your stucco system basically built on top of that. But as we'll see here in a few slides, the stucco doesn't go on completely after everything else is done on the facade. It is integrated with your water resistive system. So here's a shot of the foundation, typically seen at the foundation level anyway, where you have a weep screed at the bottom of your stucco to allow for proper drainage. And something I didn't know until I saw this was that those holes at the base of the stucco there, or at the accessory piece, are not actually for drainage, although they do end up providing additional source of drainage. But those are for the stucco to bond to, so that you get good adherence to the actual accessory at that location. So the biggest problem with stucco installations that you'll find, and similar to EIFS, and it's EIFS, which we're not covering, is water intrusion and buildup behind that, and not allowing water to properly come out of behind your stucco system. So this is just building codes. We won't get too in depth on here, but I did want to list some of the ASTM references for installation of the different systems. You've got the 2015 International Residential Code, which I believe is still governing in most jurisdictions, and then you've got individual requirements listed within that building code for each different system, from the lath, the plaster itself, the installation of the coats. Typically you got a 20 or 48-hour window between the scratch and the brown, and then even longer sometimes with the finish coat. So again, here's some industry standard sources for material for stucco. There's a bunch of different industry resources that are out there with technical content and manufacturers' best practices, things like that. And there are some variations between these sources and their recommendations and procedures and installation details. So there's some nuances there that you should at least be aware of, that they exist. So we mentioned them, but the accessories to the actual Portland cement mix itself, you've got your lath, you've got your, and then the rest of them might consider the true accessories when you look at a stucco system, which you've got your weep screeds, which we saw a moment ago, and then you've got much more frequently you've got control joints and casing beads. And control joints, again, it's to guard against cracking. It's similar to concrete in that it cracks, and it shrinks whenever it cures, and so you need to control that cracking by the use of control joints. And there's like a 2.5 to 1 ratio of length to width, that you don't want to exceed for a given stucco panel. So again, that's a huge piece of controlling water infiltration with stucco. Is that's an automatic avenue for infiltration behind your stucco system. So again, casing beads is simply offers the stucco a termination piece. So here you've got a shot of the felt paper, and on top of that the lath that's fastened in place. These red lines indicate the furring strip. So typically you want your actual lath to be anywhere from 1/4 inch off the surface of your substrate material. And similar to concrete, you don't want your reinforcing sitting on the bottom of the subgrade, on top of the subgrade. You typically have it off the ground a little bit so that you can actually provide that tensile strength for the material. So that's what the lath is effectively doing, is it's providing the stucco some tensile strength. So here's another example of a lath with it's more of a chicken wire type product, and you see the nailing caps there that are being used to provide that 1/4 inch furring. And here's some more examples of some weep screeds and some casing beads. And we touched on the importance of control joints and ensuring that you've got um, those in your stucco system. Otherwise, it again will crack. And it'll crack where you don't want it to. So here's a kind of a good shot of a cut through of stucco installation, where you can see the control joint accessory inside the stucco. So it's designed to allow for that movement there and provide a break in the panel so that you don't have cracking. And here's a picture of a casing bead that you'd see at the perimeter of your stucco. Again, just to provide a clean joint. A lot of times you'd see this, up against, the edges of a window jamb, so that you can have a solid substrate to provide some caulking to as well. There's some more accessories that are used. You've got actual expansion joint materials. You've got reveals, corner beads, similar to what you'd see in like a gypsum plaster. You've got that same thing for stucco. So, and here's some more examples of after your finish coat is complete, you've got other accessory pieces that you can see, and this is why stucco is so diverse, as you can get some of these more ornate materials and products that are pre-manufactured, and you can bring them on the job site and just basically fasten them in place and move on. There's no additional finishing required. A lot of times you'll seal up to whatever that material is and move on. So for general installation, it varies dramatically when you see this happen, but a lot of times it happens right after your envelope is essentially, you've got it sheathed and you're installing weather resistant barriers, and the main piece is that you've got to start your system at the base of the wall to get your shingle lap in place. So as we'll see here in this slide, the important factor is that you shingle lap your weather resistant barrier so that water flows down and out the building on top of either the base flashing that's shown here or the weep screed system that we saw a couple slides ago. So it's important to make sure that water is not allowed to reverse lap into the building or simply behind the stucco. Now again, it's a little more in depth on just your weather resistant barrier system and the importance of that behind your stucco system. There are some more pictures of typical lath installation, and it's kind of hard to see some of the corner accessories that are being used there. But you've got your initial scratch coat, which is just what it sounds like. It's essentially for your next 2 coats to help bind to and to really mix in with the lath for reinforcing. I've got a helper in here now who's going to oversee the rest of this presentation. So here we've got the installation of the brown coat system, and that's again following base coat, and really you start to kind of get the exterior texture of the stucco system with this brown coat. Then again, this shows an extruded foam ornament that you might see at the surrounding some of the windows or fenestrations in the facade, and you'd have your final finish coat of stucco often over the top of those foam pieces. Here's a shot of installation of the finish coat system, and again, that's typically 48 hours, depends on the cure time of the stucco, but it could be up to even 7 days past the installation of the brown coat. And a lot of times this will have a pigment, and you can have an integral color to the stucco itself, or in some cases owners choose to simply paint over it after the fact. And this is one of the reasons why stucco is so difficult to blend with other adjacent installations, as you got to make sure you get the pigment right, or you're going to end up trying to repaint, essentially the whole wall. We touched on the installation and importance of sealants. As you can see here, so you get the casing bead, and you got a backer rod and sealant up at the top of your door jamb here. And of course, your weather is just a barrier wrapping into the opening. So it's extremely important to get those systems correct to prevent water infiltration. So now we're touching on a little bit of the problems that you might see with stucco, and to no surprise, as mentioned earlier, stucco cracks, and that's an avenue for water infiltration. And so most commonly you see this around doors, windows, any kind of opening or fenestration in the stucco facade is where you're likely going to have cracks. And we won't touch on these too much. Again, this is a presentation originally done by my company, which was borrowed and trimmed down for purposes of this class. But here's a number of the reasons that your stucco can crack. And again, here's some photos of some water intrusion behind the stucco, and you'll see why that occurs here in the next slide. But as you can see, the damage that can be caused, it can be extensive, and it's usually not as obvious as the picture on the top left, where you clearly got bubbles essentially build up of vapor behind the stucco finish system, and that's not as obvious all the time, and you might have conditions like the bottom left, but not necessarily be aware of it on the exterior. So, water does not bypass stucco itself. It's properly finished and floated. It's 99 times out of 100 at one of the fenestrations or openings or improper use of accessories, sealants. So it's rarely ever the stucco itself, unless there's a stucco installation issue that would allow water to infiltrate via cracks, things like that. So, but it is generally a porous material, and it will allow some water infiltration behind it. And again, here's some causes of water intrusion, typically that you see behind the stucco facade. I'm not going to go too in depth on that either. Here's some improper finishing, just somebody getting lazy with it. And just to touch on it briefly, the low permeability rating of certain installations can cause vapor to get trapped behind the stucco system, which can contribute to photos like you saw on the previous slides that are just not going to allow that water to escape. Now here's a kind of a visual representation of that happening, where you have improper drainage and water's not allowed to flow freely behind the system, and therefore it gets trapped, and the vapor transmission happens, and it's not able to breach that stucco finish surface, which is how we get the bubbles that we were seeing on the past slides. So again, not going to touch too much on the visual inspection for this presentation, but I do hope you learned something. I know I did going through this, so I appreciate your time and hope you have a wonderful day.